Welcome to the DevGraph Tech Talk series. I'm your host, Darren. In this video, DevSpaces 101, we're going to show you in just a few minutes everything you need to be quickly productive and coding in DevSpaces. Imagine that you're given a task, you got a bunch of stuff going on your workstation, you can fire up a completely clean, pre-configured, ready to go DevSpace and be coding and getting your work done in a matter of seconds. Let's get started. We're going to show you how to quickly install the browser extension. It's not strictly speaking needed, but it'll make your life a lot easier. Then we'll get into development and debugging of standalone Java applications as well as web applications. We'll show you how to automate the project startup so developers can be productive the second they open their DevSpace, and also take a look at the default container image and what other ones are available. To make this things interesting, we're going to use a little web application that plays the mastermind game. In this game, there are 4 slots, which can contain one of 4 colors. And the user makes a guess, and they are told how many hits they have, which is the right color in the right slot, or pseudo hits, right color, but it's in the wrong position. And with that information, you can try to continue to guess until you get the number right. So that'll be our web application we'll use for this little video. To get the browser extension, go to start.devspaces.com, click the Get Extension button, and you'll find links to each browser. I'm using Chrome, so at the Chrome Web Store, I can get the DevSpaces extension here. So really what this does is it adds a DevSpaces button to each project in GitHub, and this will be applicable for any branch that you want to build a project off of, also issues and pull requests as well. It's pretty nice. So with that in place, now we're ready to get started. So this is a GitHub project where I've got our sample application. I'm on a branch where I'm going to test the initialization. Now that I've got the browser, I've got this DevSpaces button. I'll click that, and what that does is it goes ahead and starts a new DevSpace for me with that project all configured and ready to go in a full-featured cloud IDE, which has got some really nice features. Once we do the startup configuration, it's going to be even nicer. So here it's giving me a preview of the README. I've got terminal windows where I've actually got a development container here. I'll show you in just a second. It's asking us, do we want to import Java projects? You want to say yes. That's going to tell the DevSpace to run the JVM in the standard mode. We'll go ahead and say exclude the Thea files. And then we don't have a gitpod configuration yet. So we'll say go ahead. We'll just hold on to that for right now. If I do htop, you can see here that I've got 4-core container with approximately 16 gig of RAM, so I've got a nice machine to work with. Our project here, I've got some build scripts, so we'll go ahead and we'll build our server, and this is a Java process with an embedded Tomcat server. I've also got a script to run it. All of these are using Maven, so these scripts are essentially just shortcuts to Maven. And we can run our server as well. So when DevSpace opens up a process that listens on a port, it's going to have this pop-up here telling us that there's a service available. We can say open up preview, and it gives us the web application here. So here's our mastermind game. I'll click on that. Basically, it's just going to give me a quick window where I can make a guess as to what the combination is, red, 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 red. So I'll say submit, and right now it's just picking RGBY. So we can, and it's actually only partially implemented. It's only checking for a winning combination. So if I do RGBY and say submit, then it's going to tell us that we were correct. So that's the basics of running a web application inside your DevSpace. So now let's go ahead and we'll set up the project. If you don't want to do this when you first get prompted, you can always use the gp init command, and that will do the same thing from a command line. We're going to start. The gitpod.yml file is the way that you configure the startup. And by default, it creates just this Maven installation task. We'll customize that more in just a second. For now, let's continue with our startup wizard and update the Docker configuration file. This is giving us a few common default images to use. Just for as an example, we'll choose the MySQL image and say that we wanted to generate the Dockerfile for us. All that we'll have right now is the declaration of the image that we want. So you need to keep in mind that you won't have sudo or root privilege once you start your dev container. So anything that you need to install, this is the place to do it. So as an example, let's say that I need a Redis server installed. So I can do something like this and use apt-get to install the Redis server and then do some cleanup. You'll notice that in the gitpod YAML, it added the image element with a reference to the Docker file that we're going to use. Now, the default tasks that generated the Maven install, let's go ahead and put some application-specific commands in here. So the init element will only happen when the workspace is first created, and here we're doing a Maven package. It'll also do the install. The command element will run every time a workspace is restarted. So we want our web app to get started. And name just gives it a helpful name so that we know what's going on in the different terminal windows below. We can declare the port 8080 and say that whenever an application process exposes that port, go ahead and open the preview, and that'll save us the time of having to click on the button that we saw in the pop-up window. So now that we've got all that, we can go ahead and save these changes. And these changes are not going to take effect until we actually restart our workspace. And we also need to check in these files. So let's do that. We'll check in to our Git repo, and then we'll go ahead and push to the branch. Once this is pushed, now I can come back here to GitHub, and let's go to that same branch. And if I click on DevSpaces now, it's going to start a process to create that new image for me. So this is going to go through, take the MySQL base image, and then run the commands that I specified, which are going to add the Redis server. Once it's completed that, it'll go ahead and start the workspace for me. And now we've added our customization to this as well. So what we should see happen is we should see our application would have been built and the web app started, and then the preview window opened once it's ready to go. We can see here there's a pop-up for port 3306. That's the MySQL database because we are using that image now. We'll close that. Say yes, we want to import Java projects. And so you can see it went ahead and opened up the web application for us. Downloading quite a few files. If we go and open up a new terminal window, you can also see that it's got MySQL installed because that's the image that we chose. And you can see the databases that are listed here as well. So let's take a step back and look at what we did. We automated the startup of our DevSpace using the gitpod.yml file. These are the commands that are available. Init is only when the workspace is first created. Command is on every startup. There's also before, which will happen before either of those two if you need some task done before that. In the lower left-hand corner, there's an example of a Node.js application. Here, the tasks are on init, the Node package manager install, and then command. Every time the workspace is started, you want to run the server in dev mode. Now, there's other things that we can do too. Sometimes the preview opens before the web server is actually ready. This is a little bit more complicated example that uses a slightly different Tomcat startup method, the Catalina.sh script. You can see the third command down uses await port element. So it's not going to do the preview until port 8080 is listening. Also, there's a sleep in there. Sometimes the server, even after it starts listening, your web app may not be ready. And you can see how from a command perspective to manually do a preview. Another nice thing you can do, I have a bunch of different terminal windows opened here, and each has a nice name. So if I have a preference for how I want my development set up, I can automate all of that in the gitpod.yml file. We already discussed that you don't have access to sudo in your DevSpace, and for anything that you would normally use this for, you can use the Dockerfile to achieve that. We showed an example of that. Usually you're installing missing packages or dependencies that you need. This is the default. If you do not specify a Docker image, the gitpod workspace-full is what will be used. I've shown here a few of the language versions, so it's got Java, Ruby, Python. You can actually go look at the Docker file and see exactly what this image has on it. If you wanted to specify a different version of Java by default, the Docker file would be the easiest place to do that. So let's take a look back in our code. We can look at how to run and debug applications. I've got a little sample main application in here, which we can open up. All it's going to do is ask for the user's name and then say hello. You can notice that there are links here to both run and debug. So if I click run, that's going to open a new terminal window and run this program. It's going to compile it first, so it's taking a second right now. And I'll say Darren, and it says hello, Darren. The nice thing is we can also do debug from here as well. So I'll put a debug breakpoint here, and I'll click the debug, and it's also going to compile again, open up a new debugging console window, and the program execution should halt at the breakpoint that we just created. You can see that the orange bar means that the debugger is attached. I'll say Darren, and now we've hit our breakpoint. You can see the variable str does have the string Darren. We'll go ahead, and you've got your normal continue to run, step over, and into and out of functions. We'll go ahead, step over, it printed hello Darren, and then continue to run, and we're done. Now, if you have a web server that's running, you can set it to use the Java debug port option. And what you can do is if you go to add configuration, there's a little macro here, and it's got some nice options. You can choose Java attach. And what you can do, you can put in the port here. So if we chose, for example, 8081, then we could use that configuration. We can set breakpoints in our code and attach to a running process. Well, that's it for DevSpaces 101. That's all the basic info you need to be productive coding in DevSpaces. We hope you have fun. Subscribe to this channel for the upcoming DevSpaces 201 video, where we'll cover advanced project configuration and other techniques. Until then, we'll see you next time on the DevGraph Tech Talk series.